Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the review for The Shifters by Judas Cloud. A campaign that was more of a movie and a point-and-click adventure than an RTS. Is it any surprise? Now, this actually came out in 2000, the year 2000. We don't know what month, at least not according to my documentation. So I think I said it was like 1999 or something thereabouts. I wasn't too far off from just memory. I did patch the EXE to 1.16.1, and it didn't seem like we were missing anything. Maybe there were some custom weapons or something, but obviously the heroes didn't play out to be super effective or impactful or important in the gameplay itself. So I don't think that there was too much of a significance lost if we did lose something, as the original EXE was made through like Arsenal and Stardraft, and it was really old stuff, obviously, from 2000. So the 161 EXE is available should anybody decide they want to, I can't even really say play this, but experience this, as there is very little to play. Indeed, out of 22 map files, only three had any RTS gameplay to speak of. The other, out of the rest of the 19 remaining, I would say about half of them were just straight up cutscenes that lasted from a minute to 3 minutes, and the other half were like these pseudo cutscenes where you moved around and read text, a point-and-click adventure, a visual novel using StarCraft as an engine. And it's really strange to me, honestly. I don't understand why anybody would look at StarCraft and see this platform, this engine, as a way to deploy a story of this kind, an experience of this kind. Because Judas Cloud, the author, is not, as far as I can tell, incapable of producing something that is actually resembling RTS gameplay. I mean, we played 3 RTS missions, and yes, there was some weird gimmick stuff, and the level design was pretty bad in most of them, especially the second one, where there was the giant Trump wall. And, I'll get into all of that later on in the review. But it just puzzles me mostly because of the fact that he demonstrated some understanding of what enjoyable team-esque games can be like when you use them in a campaign setting, when you have a commander that speaks to you through dialogue and sort of discusses what they're going to be doing, gives you some sort of game plan. Whether or not the AI actually commits to that game plan is a completely different story, and of course not something that is possible without heavy AI modding, and wasn't really possible for the average Joe who wanted to boot up PyAI and start working, because PyAI didn't exist back in 2000, and the AI script extender plugin by Nave didn't exist in the year 2000. So yeah, of course, all the way back in Y2K, you're not going to see crazy AI modding. You're not really going to see any AI modding, actually. At least in the context of campaigns. I know there's some total conversions that had some editing to the AI. But ultimately, even with those limitations, Judas Cloud still made 3 maps that had, 2 or 3 players on a team, one of which was the human player, and the rest of which were AI allies. And that was cool. That was actually the only good thing about this entire campaign, if I'm being honest. Because look at what was surrounding it. Super generic writing. It ended with literal power of love. That trope, which is almost always universally used to, it's almost frowned upon using it even in a comedic or satirical sense, because it's so unfathomably stupid that to include it in a comedy project would be bad form. It's like telling a joke everybody's already heard. And yet it was in this. That's really crazy to me. That is worse than anime. That's way worse than anime. It's turbo anime. And you don't even really need to think about the writing, because you just think about the way it made you feel. Really uncomfortable, like it was written by a 12-year-old who thought they were tapping into the next greatest level of fanfiction.net. And indeed, I felt like I was in the annals of fanfiction.net many times in this particular production, especially when it comes to the shifters as a concept. You might say that, okay, the concept might be somewhat realistic, because if you look around at humanity now, and half of them want to become fucking furries. So yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe some people do want to just become Zerg and identify as, Zerg-kin, Zerg here. And on top of it, for whatever reason, be it reasonable or otherwise, I can see a world where maybe inside StarCraft, once you get into the setting enough, you can find a way to ingratiate the concept of a shifter, somebody who willingly becomes a servant of the Zerg, infested or otherwise. They're not claimed by the Zerg. They almost claim Zerg kinship themselves and try to serve the swarm. And okay, maybe that concept can work, but its deployment here was so just, again, cringy and generic, and uncomfortable. It was actually maybe generic is the wrong term in this case. Maybe it almost is paradoxical to consider this like the average or the baseline or something that's mediocre, because this really did make me feel cringe I haven't felt in a long time, and I just fucking played the Sonic games. So that should carry some weight, I feel like. It's also impossible to take the story seriously, because you're looking at it from the top-down perspective of StarCraft. For the vast majority of stuff, we weren't sitting in briefings. In fact, the briefings were very remarkably short, I would say, in most of the cases, which is something that would normally be in your favor if you're a StarCraft campaign, because that means that there's more time spent in-game. But there's no voice acting in these movie maps. There's nothing to accentuate the character's goals and traits through intonation or inflection or diction, even word choice. Like, it all is very, very similar. It doesn't feel like one character speaks with a different cadence, even with just reading their language. And in fact, the personality I applied to them by making one of them Russian and the other one N is like more personality than the dialogue it actually deserves. So, on top of that, almost no sound effects are going to be used in this thing. The ones that are used are completely out of place and weird, just bizarre. Like, the sound effects when you walk next to an Ultralisk or a Hydralisk or something, they're completely different than the actual Zerg unit responses or any sound effects that they've ever made in the campaigns or anything. So, it doesn't even fit with what you are used to when playing StarCraft and when playing the original campaigns. And so, the soundstage that is established, when there is a soundstage established, that isn't just the games, is completely unbelievable and confusing and inconsistent with what you're used to. And oftentimes there just flat out isn't a soundstage to speak of, so I'm not even sure which one is worse. When it does actually have a soundstage, the Shifters is actually having terrible sound choreography, along with actual visual choreography, of course. It doesn't help that the music just popped in and out all the time. And something that I didn't really comment on in the playthrough, but when music comes in and out with no warning, you as the player actually have to hold control and hit M to quickly toggle the music on or off. And so when I had to listen, I had to strain to listen for any music that was coming through so that it wasn't going to overlap with the default StarCraft music, and quickly turn on or turn off my music volume, which is why sometimes when I was in the victory screen, the score screen, like maybe there was no music in that, or there was no music in the briefing or something, because I turned it off because previously, right before that, in the mission, there was some music playing that wasn't the default game's music. So there was no attempt to loop the music organically and provide some sort of soundtrack or, again, sound staging. And generally that isn't what you want. You don't want to add that extra burden to the player. And so, I just happen to know that. Most people probably won't even know. And so you're just going to have random music overlapping. Or the player's going to have to sit through no music at all because they don't feel like doing that all the time. Also, it bears repeating that the music itself was super out of fucking place. Like playing, emo Nickelback-esque music. as this guy's, our main protagonist, Yvonne, is like walking through this wasteland of Korhal. And he's like, I lost her. Oh, no. I can't believe it. And meanwhile, it's like, it's been a while since I could say I played a damn campaign. So, really, that's what we got. Like, the presentation is just utter garbage. The execution of almost every concept was terrible. But, like I said at the beginning of the review, there's one concept that is worth discussing at greater length. Because I guess it's a good thing. This review would be 3 minutes long otherwise. I wouldn't have even bothered jumping into the review at all at that point, because it's just not something that would have deserved a review. But like I said, the concept of larger scale missions that we only saw 3 times, of course, power of 3, rules of 3, 3, 3, 3, all over the fucking place. That is important. That's a good thing to have in an RTS where you're supposedly having these large scale engagements. Obviously, it completely contradicts any story, involvement where you're walking through, like, I'm going to raid this infested palace with just my one ghost hero and nobody else, no other backup. When before they annihilated us with, like, giant 200 armies and nukes everywhere and stuff. Whatever, who cares? but when you're actually playing it, you're playing StarCraft, and there's no custom tech trees, there's no changes to the game flow, or no mods to the tech trees themselves, or anything like that, which is, of course, unfortunate, because StarCraft does have some issues, especially in the level design that we have, where it would have been nice to have some sort of resolution to those problems, or at the very least, the better level design. And again, the level design is abhorrent, but the fact that we have some AI allies that communicate to us and have some personality, at least in theory, again, conceptually, they should have some personality that they express not just through dialogue, but also through their attack patterns and their tendencies as a player. The same way a player would express their personality, the same way I did by massing Zerglings and Firebats in the second mission, and spamming out Vultures in the third one before finally facing the music and spamming out Goliaths instead. So, that sort of thing is what you want out of an that sort of thing is what you want out of an RTS experience. You want something that feels like an actual game. You want something where you're playing an RTS, you're playing StarCraft, you're playing some modified version of StarCraft, sure, but you're doing so with an AI ally or a couple AI allies and against a couple of, a team of enemies, and maybe some free-for-all stuff thrown in the mix, because that's my kind of shit, man. That's what I like. And that's just how you show large-scale battles in StarCraft, right? You can have a bunch of glorified 1v1s, but why do that when you can run some custom AI over some bases and make it so that those AI communicate to you by communicating between the AI script and the map file to send a signal to the triggers when your AI is going to attack and stuff? I mean, he basically did that in a weird kind of way, where he would detect when the player's forces were moving out, or he would just wait until they commanded a certain number of units, which he just simply observed what were the whatever the attack wave consisted of, or something. Whatever the triggers actually ended up being. I haven't looked in and done any research in that respect, but that's what it seems like to me, is one or the other or both. And of course, the whole expansion thing, he would figure out roughly when the AI decided to expand, or detect when an SCV was brought to an expansion, or something like that. And then he would offer that discussion, right? That transmission where the player's AI ally would say, I'm going to expand here. That was cool. It's actually the first campaign I've played that's done that. Maybe it's not the only one that has done that, but that basically is the first one that I've seen to do that. So I'm actually interested to see if this guy ever ended up making anything else that more resembles a StarCraft experience. Of course, I have no confidence in that, because what I've heard of the sequel to this campaign, Fields of Ash, I think it's called, is that it's a full-blown movie map, which at some point I'm going to get drunk and stream, because that's just insane. And again, it's in StarCraft. It's not one movie map. It's 30 fucking maps like this one, and you just sit there and you press enter on stuff every now and then, and you just look around and you click and you drink and you try to forget. And I just don't understand why, or how, I guess, better yet, the only time I've seen anything remotely resembling team games and large-scale battles was surrounded by, yes, admittedly terrible level design, but also terrible everything else, and seemingly from a motivation on the behalf of the developer that wants to make something completely alien to what a game actually is, let alone an RTS. He's trying to make movies. He's trying to, tell weird anime subplot stories about the power of love and shit. He's not trying to talk about giant military space warfare and talk about political stuff or whatever. He's not trying to talk about any of that. He's not trying to tell a story that has anything to do with that. That's just a byproduct of it being in StarCraft. It's so bizarre. It's so disconnected. I just don't understand the motivation behind the designer who just says, I'm going to do all of these things that are not anything to do with what an RTS should be, but also try to make team game plays in the middle of the project. I thought this was just going to be one giant point-and-click adventure / movie, and there were 3 maps thrown in there that were actual StarCraft maps, and I just don't understand why it was like that. It's so weird. So I just wanted to take this moment, this opportunity, to remind you that is actually a worthy and honorable, what's the term that I'm looking for here? That is an objective, a quest, worthy of any level designer who's trying to make something out of StarCraft. That is something you should try to do. You should try to do exactly what I just said. Make some team games, make some large-scale stuff, throw some free-for-all stuff in there, which obviously wasn't in this campaign. Have those AIs have some personality, enemy and ally, which of course we only really got a couple of transmissions from the allies. You should try to make it feel like as immersive as possible without the her definition version of immersive, the cinematic gaming version of immersive, where you're like hand holding the player and constantly filling up the screen with a bunch of dialogue and stuff that of course I have to read because you're not going to bother voice acting. What you should do is try to use the gameplay as an avenue for expressing your character's traits and weaknesses and strengths and personalities and whatever. And that should be an element of that. Their attack patterns and their defense patterns and how much they prioritize expansions and do they proxy and what do they do in the game that represents who they are as a character in your world. That is a worthy thing to invest time into. You should be looking at custom AI. You should be trying to put this together. You should be trying to make a cohesive experience that feels like, yes, you are playing StarCraft and you have allies that are playing StarCraft with you. You're not playing this weird disconnected experience where you're playing StarCraft, but everybody else is playing some inject 10,000 minerals into me, daddy, and let me just build nothing but nukes, daddy. No, that's not what you want to do. You want to do the opposite. You want to do what I've been talking about. That is a valuable thing that we don't get enough of, and I was only ever teased it by something like this. So I hope that I can stumble upon some more gems in that respect, but you don't want to be surrounding it with a bunch of other stuff. Like, this is really a case of cinematography fucking gone wrong. You don't want to have a bunch of like random asides, 1-minute missions and stuff that are just point and clicks or movie maps. You don't need that stuff. What you want to do is just use gameplay as your storytelling tool, your primary driver of storytelling, alongside some cutscenes that bookend the maps, opening and closing. Just start with that and don't try to get creative, because people have been trying to get creative since the dawn of time with this sort of thing, since the dawn of video games as a platform, as a medium. You don't need to do that. And if you feel like you have an idea, explore it, but try not to reinvent the wheel until you understand how the fucking wheel works. I mean, Jesus Christ. So that's all I have to say about the Shifters. It was this is a little bit more of a I guess a viral sort of experience in a way. I'm not really feeling too hot about this campaign. It's more so just mostly frustrating because this is the only experience I've had in StarCraft in who knows how many years where I'm playing a campaign by somebody else and it actually feels something related to real RTS gameplay, and it's this, and it's surrounded by a goddamn movie map and stuff. So I would really like things to be more consistent. I probably would have just, in general, had a better time if it was more of an insane experience, because then at least I could have remembered it similar to Flame Knives and Eon of the Hawk, and of course the plot is similar to those, but that weird loop that was thrown by the 3 macro maps. It's just 3, man. God damn it.